Rhinos are one of the most intriguing animals to ever walk on this planet. Their unique horns are the first things that come to mind, with many species from different regions having many different types. Some have one, others have two. Some grow long horns, others short. They reminisce of a mythical animal of similar stature, that being the unicorn, a legendary creature with one single horn on its head. So much so that one species even bears the specific name, Unicornus. Even so, creatures like the unicorn are still considered to be myths, but this too may not be true. For back in the late Miocene to the late Pleistocene, one mammal roamed the northernmost Eurasian lands with an interesting feature on its head. This animal will become such an odd mystery that it will have many paleontologists questioning its true appearance. Could this long-forgotten animal have possessed an extraordinary long horn, a short horn, or did it even have one to begin with? This animal's vague image in an ironic way would surge a long-abandoned quest for a single-horned animal similar to the beast of legend. We would like to welcome you all to Elasmotherium, the Siberian Unicorn. The discovery of the first fossils of Elasmotherium to this day remains a mystery, and the unnamed holotype was given to the Moscow University by Princess Yekaterina Romanovna Duskova of St. Petersburg in 1807. How she acquired the holotype is currently unknown, but the circumstances could consist of her either finding the fragment herself or it being gifted to her following an excavation. The holotype itself consisted of a left portion of a jaw. The exact whereabouts of the holotype is unknown, but it was discussed to have probably been found somewhere in Siberia. In 1809, German paleontologist Gotthelf Fischer von Waldheim described the type species of the animal, naming it Elasmotherium sibiricum, with the prefix elasmos being derived from the Greek word meaning lamina, as well as the suffix therian meaning beast. The type species sibiricum comes from a Latinization of the word Siberia, and meaning coming from or pertaining to Siberia. Since the majority of Dashkova's fossil collection is from that region, 3 years later, in 1812 during the Patriotic War, almost all of the fossils in Moscow University were destroyed, leaving the Elasmotherium specimen to be the only one to make it out safely, as it was transported away from the location to the city of Nizhny Novgorod. Fortunately, after the war ended, however, the material was brought back to Moscow. Years later, in 1855, more fossil material of Elasmotherium was excavated from the Rhine Valley in Germany. One of them was a partial skull, which was later described as Stereoceras galli. However, it's now considered a junior synonym of Elasmotherium. Moving on throughout the years, more and more Elasmotherium remains were being found, one of them being an almost complete skull that was uncovered in the lower Volga River from Russia by Alexander Konovlukh. With so many fossils being uncovered, a few more Elasmotherium species were described, including Ecology Environment by Russian paleontologist Alexei Borisyak in 1914. The type species remains were found in the Black Sea region, specifically the southern bank of the Sea of Azov. However, Ecology fossils are considered rare, along with that species also being described as more primitive and derived than E. sibiricum. In 1916, another invalid genus was described as Enigmatherium stavropolitanum. This genus was based on a single tooth which was found in northern Caucasia. However, after the description of Enigmatherium, the tooth seemed to be incorrectly positioned. It was later corrected and synonymized with Elasmotherium, making up a type species called E. fischeri. Although E. fischeri has later become a junior synonym to E. sibiricum. The same thing occurred to E. inexpectanum, although information about it is currently unknown on how and when it was transitioned to E. caucasicum. Later on, many people started to refer to Elasmotherium as a unicorn due to the skull morphology in relation to a proposed massive singular horn, but were suggested to call the animal dome forehead rhinoceros or dome forehead. As time went on, more Elasmotherium fossils were found at different locations such as European Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, the Urals, Western Siberia, Transbaikalia, Kazakhstan, and China, along with a peculiar find in Norway. There are other locations where Elasmotherium may have been found, including Germany, Hungary, and Italy, but is currently up for debate. Thankfully, with so many fossil findings, we're able to find nearly complete skeletons of this genus. In 1958, a new Elasmotherium type species was described by Chow calling it Epoch, based on fossils found in Shaanxi, China. There have been debates about whether Epoch is synonymous with E. caucasicum, but as of right now, they consider it to be distinct. A few decades later, in 2004, another type species was described, that being E. coprovicum, which was found in the coprofaunal complex, although it was originally thought to be E. caucasicum, but it is now considered to be E. coprovicum, its name being based on the locality from which it was uncovered. Another discovery in northwestern China unearths a new Elasmotherium species called E. primigenium. What's interesting about this type species is that it's considered to be the most primitive of all the Elasmotherium species, dating back to the late Miocene, having been described based on a skull along with teeth that have unique features as well, with having a weak lingual groove. The vast majority of these Elasmotherium specimens are described to be huge, along with having sturdy cervical vertebrae. These massive rhinos also possess 3 functional toes on their front limbs, as well as having a small side toe. To add more to their characteristics, their skulls seem to have a long nasal bone with a full osteonasal septum and bounded eye sockets on the front sides. As for their teeth, no canines or incisors are present, though milk incisors are assumed to be part of the dental structure due to the alveolar sockets in the mandible. The premolars and molars have pretty high tooth crowns, which makes the whole dental structure overall very well developed. Their large skulls also contain a dome-shaped bump on their heads located on their frontal bone. The dome is also formed by sponge bone tissue, along with the outer layer side of the dome being covered by grooves. With so many grooves, it's considered well suited for blood vessels, and the height of the dome is about 15 centimeters and 30 centimeters in diameter. One fascinating thing worth noting is that Elasmotheriums have sexual dimorphism, with the female skulls being smaller along with having small frontal domes. In comparison, the males contain bigger skulls along with other skull bone anatomies. Throughout its known history, Elasmotherium has gone through many reconstructions of its appearance. Some have debated on its lifestyle and physical traits, the most popular one being its horn. In 1878, Alexander F. Brandt constructed Elasmotherium's appearance by having 2 horns. When Alex examined the skull, he noted how he was impressed by the enormous size of the frontal bone. The horn size he was basing it on was comparable to the size of the blood vessels that encircled the dome. He also assumed that the secondary horn was located at the tip of its snout. However, the remains he studied were postcranial, making his whole reconstruction of the animal very speculative. Then in 1934, a man named Zuner measured the skull along with comparing it to modern-day rhinos. He took note that the animal's neck angle was pretty chunky and considered to be the fattest animal described. However, his reconstruction of Elasmotherium was never published. As time went on, more reconstructions were being debated. One in particular, constructed by Konstantin K. Florov, depicted Elasmotherium as a bear-skinned animal with withers similar to that of horses but significantly higher, along with having a small bent head carrying a single horn. He would also consider its feeding behavior similar to a steppe-dwelling animal, utilizing its snout to dig up soil to feed, much like modern-day hogs. One pretty interesting reconstruction is by a man named Teryev along with zoologist Vasily Alexeyevich Vatican, who depicted it as more hippo-like than opposed to a rhino, thus giving it an odd lifestyle as a semi-aquatic animal and giving Elasmotherium 4 toes, much like tapirs. He even suggested that the animal probably didn't have a horn and considered the dome to be the most vulnerable spot on the skull, saying that it could easily be broken but gave Elasmotherium a small spike, like the horn on the tip of its snout. Teryev only got his semi-aquatic idea when he noticed that Elasmotherium specimens were sunken in a vertical position along wetland regions. That, however, changed between 1964 and 1966 when 2 nearly complete skeletons of the rhinos were excavated and positioned differently. When they were looked over, it was suggested that the 2 animals drowned in the wetlands as opposed to having swam as initially depicted. With that, in the early 2000s, the old aquatic lifestyle has been disproven, and that the wetland environments where some Elasmotheriums died were likely just migration routes, and their molars also showed that they were likely feeding on plants found in open fields such as plains or meadows rather than a swamp environment. With that, it's now considered that Elasmotherium roam in valleys and forests. For the time being, Elasmotherium has been depicted as a huge woolly rhino with a very long horn on its head, but the major debates arose regarding how long the horn was or whether it even possessed one to begin with. What makes it challenging is that not a single horn fossil has been found, and that's mainly because rhino horns don't fossilize that well as they're made of keratin, the same material that our hair and fingernails are made out of. The way rhino horns grow from calves is each year it increases in size by 2 centimeters, building up layers of keratin as the horn grows and hardens. When rhinos die, their horns decay away, and on top of that, they aren't even connected to the skull. In comparison, when we look at rhino skulls like the black or white rhino, we only see the skull itself with no horns attached, while the Elasmotherium skull contains a huge frontal dome where it was assumed that it could have possessed a large horn. There were cave paintings that could potentially depict Elasmotherium, one of them being from the Rouffignac cave in France where it was drawn resembling a huge rhino with one long horn. There is an issue with that, however. Despite looking like the animal with a huge humpback and horn, there have been no records of Elasmotherium findings in France, with only coelodonts being discovered in the location. The painting could have been a woolly rhino drawn by an early human who probably either forgot to draw the secondary horn or there just wasn't enough room. Another cave painting is found in a Kapovaya cave located in Russia, where the animal figures were drawn in red, some of them being mammoths, camels, woolly rhinos, horses, and one possibly being an Elasmotherium. One painting showed that it had stripes and a horn, but it was a little shorter than the aforementioned paintings. Although there is another problem, and it is the way the animal figure was drawn, with the head being positioned differently than the French painting. Not to mention, no Elasmotherium fossils are found near the cave painting either, and it's considered the cave paintings were likely just decorations rather than an image depicting what an early human had seen in the wilderness. It doesn't help that the age of each cave painting we know of that could be Elasmotherium isn't properly determined. But it's safe to say we can't fully disclose the theory if the paintings were Elasmotheriums or not, but only time will tell. Recently, a 2020 publication was made where both skulls of a male and female Elasmotherium were examined. Following the examination, it was determined that the heads were not strong enough to hold such a massive horn, but instead a significantly smaller one. In theory, it's said that this small horn is used to protect itself with other anatomical features that may be covered by it. That being said, its opposed dome structure is considered to be more like a chamber that produces vocalizations, similar to the proposed function of various hadrosaur crests. The sound chamber would have served as a good tool for males to communicate with females. That being said, Elasmotherium is currently reconstructed as a huge rhino with coated fur along with having a small horn. Hopefully in time we'll find more astounding discoveries of Elasmotherium with possibly a specimen hiding underneath the permafrost. Elasmotherium is typically depicted as a rhino with a single horn on its head, along with having fur similar to the woolly rhino and the woolly mammoth. For decades, this reconstruction was the most widely accepted by scientists for quite some time, until further studies suggested that the new reconstruction for Elasmotherium did indeed have a horn, but not as quite as long as previously hypothesized. So the Elasmotherium horn has been shrunken down significantly. While we don't know the exact size estimates for E. primigenium, E. pei, and E. caprovicum, we do have the size estimates for two Elasmotherium species that seem to equal each other in size. E. caucasica reaches at about 5 meters or 60 feet in body length and weighs about 3.55 tons, or 3.9 5.5 short tons. With E. sibericum, the largest one being estimated to be about 4.5 meters or 50 feet in length, with a shoulder height of 2.5 meters, 8 feet 2 inches. Because of their impressive size, Elasmotherium is generally considered to be one of the largest rhinos to have ever existed and perhaps the largest to thrive in the Quaternary period. Their size alone practically mirrors that of the woolly mammoth and heavily dwarfs coelodonta, better known as the woolly rhino. With just how huge Elasmotherium is, they would have been quite the hassle to deal with if they were to still exist today, as evidenced by how modern day rhinos barely tolerate people and even their vehicles. Elasmotherium belongs to a distant group of rhinos called Elasmotherinae, a subfamily within the rhinoceros family. These animals include the likes of Chimentodon, Hispanotherium, Minoceras, and Cynotherium, just to name a few. While the group's evolutionary history began in Central Asia between the early to Middle Miocene epoch, their ancestral origins designate all the way back to the Oligocene. The group itself also persisted from the early Miocene into the late Pleistocene, at the beginning of their evolution. Elasmotherinae had long snouts along with nasal horns, which eventually evolve into a frontal horn. However, while Elasmotherines are mainly known for their huge size, horns, along with the length of their molars, these main characteristics were completely absent during the Middle Miocene, as the rhinos during that time were shorter in size and hadn't quite reached their gigantic proportions just yet. However, during the Middle Miocene, the group was quite common throughout Central and Eastern Asia. With how abundant they were during their time, it helped determine their evolution, their survival, and eventually their increase in size. The animals were able to travel to regions such as North Africa, where environments during that time were semi-arid. Despite being able to travel to the vast majority of Asia and North Africa, once the late Miocene ended, the environment began rapidly changing, driving many Miocene animals to extinction due to the migration of ruminant species. Elasmotherines were also affected by these changes and were nearly wiped out at one point. Thankfully, one of the rhinos, that being Cynotherium, was able to adapt to these new changes. When paleontologists looked through its morphology, it was suggested that Cynotherium is a likely candidate that Elasmotherium evolved from. As the rhinos got bigger along with their nasals getting wider, Elasmotherium came into being. When it evolved, the species began to rapidly spread throughout Eurasia. The subfamily itself has managed to achieve the greatest evolutionary success among rhinos. What led Elasmotherium to its success were also its teeth that had increased hypsodonty, which helps it eat very hard food, including the highly fibrous ones. Elasmotherium even got bigger, ended up outweighing Coelodonta, Stephanorhinus, white rhinos, and black rhinos. Elasmotherium even ended up being the last living member of Elasmotherinae, where it lived in the northernmost parts of Eurasia, being well adapted to cold temperatures and vegetation that they're able to chew on. With this evolutionary success, they managed to end up being the biggest rhinos that lived throughout the Pleistocene. After the huge evolutionary success that Elasmotherium made due to its subfamily nearly disappearing during the Miocene, Elasmotherium was able to call China its home around the late Miocene epoch. Temperatures during that time were changing left and right due to the subtropical climate and the increase of arid landscapes. The same goes for the increased elevation of the Tibetan Plateau. When global cooling was taking place, many plants were affected by these changes and new flora came into being, becoming part of a new diet for many herbivorous animals. Elasmotherium being one of them fed on many plants despite debates surrounding what exact plants they fed on. It was suggested that Elasmotherium probably ate flora like rhizomes and underground stem plant along with sage, cattail, naiad, and flowering plant eudicots. Since the arid environment was increasing, Elasmotherium lived along with other fauna during this given time. This include animals such as the Calicotherium and Silotherium, along with herds of horses like Hyperion and deer called Dicroceras. Though these herds of animals would give Elasmotherium its space or find other plants to feed on as to not disturb these rhinos. However, tall animals like Paleotragus will feed on tall plants which Elasmotherium couldn't reach. Early bears like Urcebus also roam the environment, though they would much rather avoid a huge rhino. The same applies to predators like the hyenids, Hyonyctotherium and Ictotherium. But there are two saber-toothed cats that hunted some of the animals in the region, but either would have been unable to hunt Elasmotherium or at least attempted to bring down their caps. These two would have been Metylorus and Machairodus. After the Miocene ended, Elasmotherium continued living and expanding its range throughout the changing environment right into the Pliocene. Grassland vegetation was becoming more available, and when grasslands were expanding, so was the Elasmotherium's range when they migrated throughout Eurasia. The climate also underwent another drop in temperature following the end of the late Miocene, and throughout the Pliocene, much of the flora was relatively similar to how it is in current times. The same applies to the temperature in the environments where it was warm and dry in some places. Arid environments were still present despite the spread of grassland biomes, though with Elasmotherium coming in, other animals followed close behind like the rhinoceros Stephanorhinus. While their ranges overlapped, they likely avoided confrontations with each other. The ostrich relative Pachystruthia were also present in some regions where they would run past the huge rhino. Predators were also drawn to these herbivores. These include Casmoporthetes, aka the ruddy hyenas, and the short-faced hyena Pachycrocuta. They would probably not be able to take down Elasmotherium, but would be an annoyance to the animal. Eurasian pumas were also present as well as Meganterion, a saber-toothed cat. Though of course, Elasmotherium managed to live through the Pliocene into the Pleistocene epoch. Yet again, the environments were shifting because of the constant climate change as temperatures became colder, leading up to glaciers covering huge chunks of North America and Eurasia. The Pleistocene also saw occasional shifts between glacial and interglacial cycles. The latter consisted of sea levels rising, increase in temperature, and glaciers receding, a phenomenon that was then undone when the world shifted into a glacial cycle. Many biomes were transitioning together, and forest biomes were also increasing along with steppe and tundra environments. Since the biomes were all mixed, it also increased the plant diversity for many animals along with open plains where huge herds of animals would migrate to. Elasmotherium even got bigger during the Pleistocene, making it the largest rhino in its time. For its ecological behavior, it's not impossible to believe that Elasmotherium, like most other rhinos, is solitary and only comes together for mating. Rhinos in general also develop thick hides to protect themselves, a trait that can also be applied to Elasmotherium while simultaneously being covered in thick fur, keeping it warm during the harsh winters of Eurasia. Little critters like wolverines, European badgers, least weasels, stoats, marmots, and sables are known to live in these environments and would hardly pose a threat to Elasmotherium. Birds were also frequent occupants of the mammoth steppe. These include the golden eagle and white-tailed eagle along with common ravens. Vultures like the Cinereous vulture circle the land in search of corpses, and they will not pass up a chance if they come across a dead Elasmotherium. Elasmotherium. The rivers and lakes that Elasmotherium drinks in also contain small fauna like various species of amphibians, Eurasian beavers, and European otters. Jumping over the rivers, herds of deer like the reindeer, red deer, and elk would pass by the huge rhino wandering into the open landscapes for food. Other larger species of deer consisted of moose or elk as they're called in Eurasia, and most importantly the largest deer species that ever lived, that being Megaloceros, or as is more commonly known, the Irish elk. Other animals also roam in the steppe and tundra environments will be the saiga antelope, an oddly big nose-shaped antelope, along with flocks of running birds like the Asiatic ostrich, whose presence in northeastern Asia is considered dubious. Boars would also be able to tolerate the rhino, but as long as they don't accidentally spook it as modern-day warthogs do to the white rhino. When seasons change in Eurasia, there will be huge herd migrations consisting of musk oxen, wild yak, Eurasian horses, aurochs, steppe, and Eurasian bison. None of the herbivores listed would be a competitor for Elasmotherium, but eventually more unique animal groups had arrived and some likely competed with Elasmotherium, among these being mammoths. Mammoths, being as diverse as they are, consisted of 3 species that lived alongside Elasmotherium, including the steppe mammoth, woolly mammoth, and the southern mammoth. Today, modern-day rhinos and elephants typically avoid and ignore one another, but when they do fight each other, usually the bigger and bulkier elephants would win or scare the rhinos off. The same thing likely applies to Elasmotherium, as it would have much rather avoided the mammoth rather than fighting it, though the fight between a mammoth and Elasmotherium might be even since they are both about the same size. There is an Elasmotherium specimen with a puncture wound on its frontal shoulder. Remarkably, it showed signs of healing, meaning that Elasmotherium survived the attack. The attack was either from another one of its own, a mammoth, or another rhino that lived in Eurasia, that being Coelodonta, or the woolly rhino. Both rhinos likely ignored each other, but when it comes to competing for land or food, these rhinos could have fought one another. Elasmotherium overall would be safe from predators, though it would only be vulnerable as a calf and would remain close to its mother for protection. Small predators like the European dall might see the calf as an opportunity, but would much rather turn the other way and go after easier prey since the mother would be on high alert. Packs of canids like grey wolves would pose a threat to the calf, along with cave hyenas, a prehistoric subspecies of the modern-day spotted hyenas. When it comes to bears, they would live alongside the Eurasian brown bears and cave bears. If one of these bears came too close to Elasmotherium, it would have likely given them a warning charge to back off. Given the cave bears' predominantly herbivorous diet, it likely would have hardly posed a threat to these rhinos. Different kinds of cats were also present. These included small species like the Eurasian lynx, which would hardly pose a threat to Elasmotherium. Larger fields included Eurasian jaguars, cave leopards, Aesiononyx pardonensis, or the giant cheetah, and the larger Aesiononyx pleistocynacus, some of which could have been more likely to attempt hunting in Elasmotherium during the early to middle Pleistocene epochs. Although, when it comes to bigger cats like the Eurasian cave lion and Homotherium, they may have been more frequent hunters of Elasmotherium. While it's not quite known whether cave lions were social or solitary hunters, they would have likely attempted to bring down the calves. Having been known to take down mammoths, hunting parties of Homotherium may have been capable of taking down an adult Elasmotherium. There are several animals that may or may not encounter Elasmotherium despite living at the same time, and if they did, it would likely been a rare occurrence. In Siberia, snow leopard fossils have been excavated alongside much of the other Ice Age megafauna, indicating that they could have likely crossed paths. While preferring forest habitats, tigers were present during the early Pleistocene, with the oldest specimens consisting of a current unnamed subspecies in northwestern China, the same region as where the Chinese Elasmotherium fossils have been excavated, meaning that in some instances this rhino could have encountered early tigers. Early humans may have seen the animal, but as being said, it would be rare. Throughout its existence, Elasmotherium has been living on Earth for quite some time and lived into the late Pleistocene. Elasmotherium has made quite a few appearances since its discovery, primarily in the form of video games, with its first appearance being in 2008 Fossil Fighters franchise as a wild-type Vivosaur Elasmoth, later appearing in the sequel game Fossil Fighters Champions in 2010. The next year, in 2011, it was showcased as a base game animal in Wild Park 3 that can have a multitude of different horn variants. Jurassic Park Builder will also feature Elasmotherium as a gold tier limited time creature in the Glacier Pack in the following year. Next, it'll be featured in the 2017 mobile game Jurassic World the Game as a super rare savanna creature in the Cenozoic Park. After this, it will show up in Jurassic World Alive as a rare class creature in Update 1.7.25. Elasmotherium's latest video game appearance was in Prehistoric Kingdom. It was added in Update 10 as a 3-star animal on February 26 of 2024. As for shows and documentaries, Elasmotherium's appearances are a lot more scarce, with its first appearance being in Paleoworld in 1995 episode Are Rhinos Dinos? Over a decade later, Elasmotherium will be featured in the 2006 BBC series Prehistoric Park in the episode A Mammoth Undertaking. In this episode, zoologist and adventurer Nigel Marvin will bring one back from the late Pleistocene epoch. Originally supposed to bring back food for Martha the Mammoth, Nigel ended up having his eyes set on the massive rhinoceros as it would make an amazing feature in the park. 3 years later, in 2009, Animal Armageddon will feature Elasmotherium in episode 7 titled Fire and Ice, where it was incorrectly depicted living in a rainforest in complete contrast to the mammoth steppe biome it was known to live in. Elasmotherium's most recent appearance will be in the 2024 Amazon Prime exclusive children's show Dino Dex, being shown with its original reconstruction. Overall, Elasmotherium has been featured in a decent amount of paleo media, often being overshadowed by its distant cousin the woolly rhinoceros or Coelodonta, but hopefully in the future will this woolly giant be granted its spotlight in media as the years go on. Elasmotherium was a truly fascinating Ice Age giant. It thrived peacefully from the late Miocene to the late Pleistocene epoch, but obstacles unfortunately came into place that contributed to its extinction. Moving into the later stages of the Cenozoic era, the environments began to change, and with it, about 40% of Eurasia's megafauna went extinct. The climate became cooler, and with the drop in temperature being so severe, it ended up covering the plants that many animals relied on, one of which being Elasmotherium. The huge rhino's dental structure may have also contributed to its extinction, with its plants being destroyed by heavy cooling and replaced by flora like moss. Elasmotherium may not be able to adapt by changing its diet due to its teeth not being designed to chew on the new flora that became available. As their food supply became scarce, the species began to dwindle in numbers, and ended up roaming around a few certain areas in search of food. What made matters worse was that when their population was at its lowest, they weren't able to mate fast enough due to their low reproductive rate from their huge size, which further hindered their chances of survival. Another possible factor that may have led Elasmotherium into extinction is currently in question. This certain factor involves predation from early humans such as the Cro-Magnons, Denisovans, and the Neanderthals. However, there has been no evidence of Elasmotherium being hunted by these early humans since their fossils weren't found alongside them despite the fact that they lived around the same time. It was originally thought that Elasmotherium went extinct 200,000 years ago, but remains have been found indicating that they disappeared a lot later than previously thought, one of which dates back as early 35,000 years ago, which is around the time humans migrated into the region. Humans may have potentially met Elasmotherium, and if so, it was likely on rare occasions. Despite this, the possibility remains that they may have ended up hunting down the remaining population, with the Elasmotherium vanishing from the Eurasian landscape around 35,000 years ago. Thankfully, however, despite Elasmotherium going extinct, its distant relatives to modern-day rhinos lived on into the Holocene and were able to thrive in their landscapes like Africa, mainland Asia, and into the Indonesian archipelago. Although they did not reach the titanic size of their prehistoric counterparts, these magnificent beasts are among some of the largest land animals alive today, and for thousands of years, rhinos were able to live peacefully in their environment. However, in more recent times, that which may have contributed to Elasmotherium's extinction is unfortunately threatening rhinos all around the globe once again. Many species and cell populations have been completely wiped out from their historical range due to overhunting and other human activities such as deforestation. Some of the more rare varieties are now alive only in captivity, as leaving them in what used to be their native range would unfortunately leave them vulnerable to poachers and hunters. Combined with the aforementioned destruction of their habitat by deforestation, which gives them limited space to live in, and one can begin to see just how much of an impact humans have had on these animals. And if nothing is done about this, these animals may eventually be doomed to extinction. Despite this, there are still a great many conservation efforts taking place to aid in saving the rhinos, along with zoos helping with rhino breeding programs and national parks protecting them. With this, we can hope that given time, these rhinos may be able to bounce back and will be able to live peacefully once again for generations to come. And with that, the legacy of the ancient ancestors of such magnificent animals can be preserved for all time. Ancestors like Elasmotherium, the Siberian Unicorn. Thank you all for watching our overview on the Ice Age giant Elasmotherium. We hope you all enjoyed this video as we put in a massive deal of work into it. Elasmotherium was a Goliath-sized rhinoceros for its time and deserved as much love as it could possibly get. This video was directed and narrated by myself, MikeMC9797, scripted by myself, RangoGamer, CrimsonAcro, TheDinosaurHunter, and the Primal Earth. Edited by myself, TheDinosaurHunter, the Primal Earth, RangoGamer, Straight Up Murph, and CrimsonAcro. The graphic designers for this video are Straight Up Murph for the Elasmotherium design, TheDinosaurHunter for the thumbnail, and Mephilas Seijin101 for the model and animation. And lastly, the researchers for this video are myself, RangoGamer, and CrimsonAcro. We hope you all have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next year.